Welcome back to the deep dive. You know, in the world of elite sports, we spend so much time just dissecting the results. The
Okay.
winners, the losers, the stats. But today, we're doing something a bit different. We're going to look behind the scenes,
Yeah.
diving into the mental, the physical, and the strategic foundation being laid by arguably the most scrutinized British athlete right now.
Has to be Emma Raducanu.
Exactly.
And we've collected a fascinating stack of sources here. We've got recent interviews, some training notes that have sort of emerged from her camp,
Right.
and a whole host of fan discussions that really, they capture the mood around her as she heads into 2026.
Yeah.
This isn't just about hiring a new coach.
No, not at all.
It's a complete professional reengineering.
It really is. And our mission today is to cut through all that noise and give you, the listener, a really deep, comprehensive analysis of where she's at. We're focusing on, I suppose, 3 major areas that are going to define this next chapter for her. First, there's the profound mental and physical reset she's chosen, which actually required her to tackle some quite personal demons.
Right.
Second, the high-stakes strategic overhaul, the new team members she's brought in for 2026.
Which is huge.
And finally, the really contentious debate she sparked with her very blunt assessment of the professional tennis calendar.
And if we're looking for a starting point, a sort of symbolic starting point for this new chapter, you couldn't find a starker contrast to the usual off-season for a sports celebrity.
Absolutely not.
Forget the filtered Instagram posts from, private resorts. Our key source here, the real hook, is the choice she made to actively reject that traditional, glamorous Maldives trip.
Yeah.
And instead opt for a return to absolute normality.
Her childhood bedroom in Bromley, southeast London.
Exactly that.
That choice just speaks volumes, doesn't it? It suggests that what she truly needed wasn't luxury. It wasn't rest on a beach.
No, it was grounding.
Grounding. That's the perfect word. I mean, she's arguably the most globally recognizable tennis player since that sensational U.S. Open win in 2021.
Without a doubt.
And for her to deliberately choose her parents' home, the place where she grew up, over all the usual haunts of the global tennis circuit, it just highlights this massive need to step away from that relentless pressure cooker.
It's a therapeutic choice, really. When you've lived under that kind of intense, almost suffocating public spotlight, which for her is so often coupled with injury setbacks and constant team changes, retreating to the known, to the certain. That's a form of powerful psychological rehabilitation.
So it suggests the demands of the 2025 season were maybe more taxing mentally than physically.
I think so. And we really need to understand why that was.
Okay, let's start right there then, with that nostalgic off-season choice, because it really does set the entire tone for her ambition for 2026.
It does.
She admitted she was toying with the idea of taking a proper, lavish holiday once the season ended. I mean, most players do.
Yep.
Yet she consciously decided against it. She said, and this is a direct quote, "I didn't want to have a holiday."
The word she used to describe her feeling back in Bromley was settled. So she wasn't just resting. She was rebuilding her foundations, both emotional and mental.
Right.
The sources really stress her enjoyment of just spending really good quality time with her parents. It's the simple things, being in the same bedroom, same everything.
A security blanket.
That's exactly what it provided, a security blanket after a very, very turbulent year.
It's an interesting inversion of typical celebrity behavior, isn't it? You so often hear about athletes needing to escape their hometowns to get away from the pressure.
Yeah,
But for Raducanu, her hometown is the escape from the pressure of the global tour.
precisely. And the fans, particularly those who are a bit tired of the heavily commercialized side of professional sport,
They loved it.
they absolutely loved it. We picked up on that comment from Tortured Poet 30, who felt it was refreshing to see a player actively reject the standard paid tennis clinics or that endless stream of photos from exotic, expensive resorts we always see on social media.
It gave her reset a certain authenticity.
It did. It resonated with people.
It definitely cuts through the veneer of the tennis bubble. But as you alluded to earlier, this retreat into familiarity wasn't just about being busy. It was a necessary psychological response to some severe difficulties she faced.
Yes.
Particularly that harrowing experience of the Stalking Ordeal in 2025.
We absolutely must delve into the details here because it provides such crucial context for her mental state. The sources describe this as one of the most harrowing experiences of her young life.
And the incident that brought it all to a head happened in Dubai in February, right? But the behavior had been going on for a while before that.
It had. And the truly frightening part, the scope of it, was that she had been followed by this individual across Asia at 4 consecutive tournaments.
4. That's not a single incident. That's sustained, calculated intrusion into her professional and private life over weeks, maybe even months.
It's terrifying. It really is. Because it means the threat wasn't confined to one place.
Yeah.
Everywhere she went for work, this threat followed.
And that crisis point in Dubai, being approached in a cafe?
Forcing her to hide behind an umpire's chair and break down in tears. It just illustrates the profound emotional toll that constant fear must have taken on her ability to perform, and just to exist off the court.
When you think about the mental discipline required for elite performance, the focus, the clarity, how can any athlete maintain that when they feel like they're constantly under surveillance and in danger?
It's an almost unimaginable burden.
It is.
And it likely contributed heavily to the instability we saw in her results and then the subsequent coaching carousel. That feeling of being unsafe, it just chips away at your confidence, your trust, your mental energy.
Thankfully, the sources confirmed that the man was detained and given a restraining order for what they called fixated behavior.
Which finally halted the immediate physical threat, yes.
And what's really crucial here is her reflection on this experience 10 months later. This is where we see the payoff of her choosing Bromley for her reset.
Yes. She reported feeling a significant psychological liberation. She now feels more comfortable in public, and she stated explicitly that she doesn't feel I have to hide now.
Just think about that phrase for a second. Hide.
That was her baseline.
That was her baseline state for a huge portion of 2025.
And she talked about the simple pleasure of blending in. She said she enjoys riding the train in the underground in London with friends and family, just being another face in the crino.
Which must feel amazing.
I'd imagine so. And while she still has, burly security guards providing protection globally when she's on site at tournaments.
Which is non-negotiable given her profile.
Absolutely. But that ability to reclaim some anonymity at home is just invaluable for her recovery.
It's the restoration of agency, isn't it? Of control.
It is. The security detail handles the threats in the professional sphere, but Bromley allows her to manage the emotional scars in her private life. And the psychological recovery from that kind of sustained harassment is not instantaneous, but her decision to surround herself with the familiar suggests she has successfully established a psychological sanctuary.
It's fantastic to hear that she's overcome that level of personal fear and intrusion. But the off-season, even though it was centered on mental rest, couldn't ignore a mandatory physical recovery, could it? It wasn't all just chilling out in Bromley.
No, not at all. There was a hard physical limitation imposed by her own body. She was recovering from light bone bruising in her right foot.
And for a tennis player whose entire game relies on dynamic stopping, starting, turning, foot injuries are foundational issues.
You absolutely cannot rush them.
That injury was significant enough that it forced her to pull out of 2 scheduled exhibitions in the United States.
It was, and this confirms that the initial weeks of her off-season reset had to be heavily controlled, primarily focused on rest and monitored gym work back in London.
So the physical recovery was a necessary precursor to all the technical work. You can't implement a big strategic shift if your base isn't solid.
Exactly. And that forced slowdown, it transitions perfectly into the specific, highly targeted changes she is now making to her team and, fundamentally, her game philosophy for the 2026 season. This is where the long-term planning really begins.
Okay, let's unpack this shift in strategy because this is where it gets really interesting.
It really is.
The biggest announcement is the introduction of a new coaching philosophy. This is maybe the most strategically decisive move she's made since winning the U.S. Open.
I think you're right.
She's bringing in Francisco Roig.
And that name immediately hooks anyone who follows tennis closely.
It does. The immediate headline is his pedigree. Roig was a pivotal, long-serving member of Rafael Nadal's team when Nadal won all 22 of his Grand Slam titles.
All 22. That isn't just experience. That's institutional knowledge of what sustained excellence, durability, and relentless improvement look like at the absolute highest level of the men's game.
But the goal Roig has set isn't just about winning the next match. It seems to be about fundamentally changing Raducanu's whole identity on court.
Yes. The objective, and this is the quote, is to focus on building a better Emma Raducanu and a better base level, which is a fundamental shift away from what she called a purely tactical approach.
This is the crux of the transformation. We have to spend some time here defining what that actually means.
We do. Raducanu admitted her previous approach was often, and I quote, more tactical, more just having to exploit their weaknesses.
And being very crafty.
And being very crafty. Now, crafty is a positive word, but in this context, it implies a very reactive style of tennis.
Right.
Spending enormous amounts of time pre-match scouting, adjusting your game constantly, reacting to what the opponent is doing.
That reactive style, while it shows a high tennis IQ, must be incredibly high effort, both mentally and physically.
Oh, massively. If you have to constantly change your game plan, you're always playing slightly outside your comfort zone, and that just leads to inconsistency.
So what's the new ideal?
The new ideal, as she describes it, is the hallmark of every single dominant player. Being able to just go and execute your game and know that you can win, and worrying less about the specific opponent.
It's a philosophy borrowed directly from the sport's great dictators, isn't it? The Nadals, the Djokovics, the Swiateks, players who impose their will no matter who's across the net.
Exactly that.
So how do Roig and Raducanu achieve this transition from crafty tactician to powerful dictator? What specific technical improvements are they aiming for? Because building better quality sounds a little bit generic.
That's a fair challenge. And this is where we need the technical detail. If you look at the successful dictators in the game, they all share certain foundational traits: improved technique, better timing, and superior movement patterns. Roig is focusing on quality over quantity of training hours.
Okay, let's break that down. Better timing. Does that mean hitting the ball earlier, taking it on the rise, reducing the opponent's time to react?
Precisely. In tennis, timing is often synonymous with court position. By taking the ball earlier, often inside the baseline, you reduce the opponent's reaction time, and you effectively lengthen the court for them.
So if Raducanu can improve her timing on both the return and the rally ball, she immediately moves from being reactive, waiting for the ball to drop.
Keep being proactive.
Yeah.
Intercepting the ball.
Right. And improved technique likely means less wasted movement and more efficient power transfer. She's always had a strong, flat ball, but maybe they're just refining the margins now.
The sources suggest the focus is less on raw power and more on consistency under pressure. Refining the technique means her strokes break down less when she's under duress.
For example?
For example, if they can slightly refine her forehand grip or her takeback, they reduce the variability, which makes it harder for opponents to exploit that side. The key point here is that they are not primarily trying to change her physiological capacities. She's already fit.
Right.
But refining how she uses that fitness to be more efficient.
And the ultimate clear objective for you, the listener, which directly addresses her biggest career stumbling block injuries, is that she wants to dictate the game a lot more.
So she doesn't necessarily have to run as much.
That's it.
That is the long-term sustainability goal in plain sight. If you dictate, you control the geometry of the court. If you're forcing the opponent to run side to side and you're ending points in 4 shots instead of 10, you are reducing the accumulated physical load exponentially.
It's the path to longevity.
Efficiency equals durability. It's that simple.
That makes perfect sense. But the technical philosophy is only one side of the coin. The physical foundation needs equal attention. And here she's brought in a highly specialized physical therapist, Emma Stewart.
Yes, and Stewart is coming in as the physiotherapist, but is also going to oversee her strength and conditioning program, at least initially. This is a deliberate, targeted effort to address her notorious injury history.
Especially her back and hip issues.
Absolutely.
So what makes Stewart uniquely qualified for Raducanu's specific challenges?
Well, Stewart has 2 really important credentials. First, she's a known quantity. She's worked with Raducanu before, during her time as a physio at the WTA.
So there's established trust and familiarity with her medical history.
Exactly. But critically, Stewart has since worked with British rowing, and that connection is far more relevant than it might first appear.
Ah, the biomechanics connection. Tell us more about the specific link between rowing and Raducanu's body weaknesses.
Well, Raducanu herself explicitly pointed this out, which shows a really sophisticated understanding of her own body. In rowing, because of the repeated high-force flexion and extension, you see a massive incidence of hip and lower back issues. The repetitive strain on the lumbar spine and the demands on hip stability are critical.
And these, of course, are the precise areas, the back and the hips, where Raducanu has suffered recurring, career-disrupting injuries.
Precisely. So Stewart's expertise from British rowing is likely centered on deep core stabilization, understanding rotational movement efficiency, and strengthening the compensatory muscles around the pelvis and the lumbar spine.
This is preventative medicine disguised as strength and conditioning.
It is. Raducanu stressed that Stewart knows my body's weaknesses, including the exact zones where she's a little bit prone to picking up injuries, and how to actively fortify those areas.
This sounds like a really comprehensive and data-driven approach, replacing perhaps the less structured physical preparation we saw earlier in her career.
I think so.
She also mentioned another benefit of this hire, which often gets overlooked in the highly male-dominated environment of elite tennis coaching.
Yes, she noted the personal benefit of having another female on the team. And while that might seem small, team dynamics and rapport are crucial.
Of course.
Having a female physiotherapist responsible for the intimate details of her strength and conditioning, and who understands the hormonal and physiological differences in training female athletes, that just adds another layer of comfort and specialization.
It seems like every single decision here, from Roig's philosophy to Stewart's specific rowing background, is geared towards one goal.
Durability and consistency.
Exactly. And there is a quiet achievement from the 2025 season that she's using as sort of proof of concept heading into this new year.
That achievement is profound in its simplicity of volume. In 2025, she played 22 tournaments across 9 months and completed 50 matches.
And this was the first time in her entire career she had managed to hit that 50-match milestone.
Think about that. For someone who has been plagued by injury and inconsistency since her breakthrough, completing 50 matches proves something critical to herself.
It proves she has the capacity for the grind.
It does. Even though she missed her last 2 scheduled tournaments due to illness and that bone bruising, she sees those 50 matches as critical evidence that she can cope, both physically and mentally, with a truly demanding schedule.
It removes that psychological question mark over her resilience.
It does.
So the takeaway from this section is clear. She has the confidence in her capacity for the grind, and the new Team Roig and Stewart is designed to refine the quality and the efficiency of that grind,
Transforming her into a player who controls matches rather than reacts to them. This sets the foundation for 2026, which begins at the United Cup in Perth in January.
Precisely. But before we move entirely to 2026, we have to tackle the elephant in the room.
Oh, yes.
Her very public comments about the structure of the professional grind itself, which stirred up a massive backlash.
Right. Here's where the conversation shifts from personal strategy to professional politics.
This statement she made about the demanding length of the professional season was surprisingly blunt. She views the calendar as a challenge, yes, but she firmly believes it is not a good look for top players to be moaning about the calendar.
Her core reasoning is built entirely on perspective and, well, the privilege that comes with being a top player. Her foundational argument is, we make a great living.
That's the cornerstone of her whole defense for keeping quiet.
It is. And she gave 2 key rationales for this anti-complaint stance. First, she feels that complaining sets a poor example for younger people they are trying to inspire.
Right, implying that whining from a position of wealth and status just demonstrates a sense of entitlement.
And her second rationale positions it simply as a reality of professional life. She views the demanding schedule as just part of the job.
Comparing it almost casually to a boss making others work.
Exactly. She acknowledged the hard truth that players are sometimes flagging mentally, physically, and everything hurts. But she concluded that the professional obligation is to put up a front that isn't complaining.
This stance, however, immediately touched a highly charged, raw nerve across the entire tennis community. It's a debate that pits the elite, well-sponsored few against the struggling majority.
And the reaction online was instantly polarized.
It really was.
Let's look first at the overwhelming criticism she faced, which we can call the privilege argument. Critics online, particularly in forums like Reddit, were ruthless.
They called her tone-deaf, a pick-me.
Yes, arguing that her opinion is skewed because she rarely faces the physical toll of a player who consistently makes deep runs in tournaments, often being out by the 3rd round.
Yeah. And this criticism led directly to the reemergence of that unfortunate and frankly very harsh moniker.
Raducanu.
Raducanu. And while that's unnecessarily cruel, it serves to highlight the core economic disparity that underlies this entire controversy.
That jab, harsh as it is, speaks directly to the income gap. The major counterpoint raised against Raducanu's great living statement is that her income stream relies predominantly on massive off-court endorsements and sponsorships.
Someone called her marketing gold.
Which is accurate. The implication is that she does not rely on tournament prize money for her wealth, unlike the vast majority of players outside the top 50.
Who have to rely on winning just to break even on their travel and coaching costs.
One commenter made the point crystal clear. They said, if tennis winnings was her only income, she'd not be saying this.
Another one went further, noting that her lucrative endorsements are less tied to her ranking and more to her unique marketability, citing her joint Euro and Chinese heritage and her good looks.
So in their view, her financial security isn't a direct reflection of her recent on-court performance.
But is that criticism slightly unfair? I mean, she did win a Grand Slam, and her celebrity status is real. Should she really be penalized for attracting sponsorship that reflects her global appeal, even if her recent form hasn't matched that peak?
That's a valid challenge.
Yeah.
No, she shouldn't be penalized for her earning power. However, I think the criticism isn't about why she earns it. It's about whose perspective she represents.
Okay.
By arguing that players shouldn't complain because we make a great living, she's talking from the position of the 1% who are guaranteed millions regardless of early exits.
Whereas the structural issue, as the lower-ranked players see it, is that the calendar forces them to play too much, not because they're greedy, but because they need the points and the prize money just to sustain their career.
And the criticism became even more targeted when critics started drawing comparisons, highlighting what they saw as inconsistencies. One commentator brought up Naomi Osaka,
Right.
who also commands massive endorsements, but, despite her own mental health breaks, had recently achieved significant on-court success, reaching a 1,000 final and the U.S. Open semifinals.
The argument being that Osaka's superstar earnings are more consistently justified by deep runs than Raducanu's recent record has been.
It's a harsh standard, but it reflects the pressure on her to perform consistently to justify that massive sponsorship valuation.
So we have the prosecution arguing privilege and tone deafness. But there is a robust defense, isn't there?
There is, which frames this entire situation as a system argument, supporting the structure as it currently stands because it serves the broader player population.
The defense often champions the needs of the vast majority. The players ranked, say, 70th to 150th, who desperately rely on the money and points from a packed schedule.
They argue that the calendar should absolutely not be built around the handful of top players who make deep runs and demand more rest.
Because removing smaller tournaments or reducing the overall schedule only benefits the already elite.
Yes, the sources cited specific examples. Players like Tien or Vachereau, who only managed to get critical little breakthroughs in tournaments because top players like Sinner or Alcaraz were absent or injured.
Right. If the tour removes those opportunities, the path for the next generation of players to break into the main circuit becomes exponentially harder.
It creates an even more entrenched elite.
And let's not forget the damned if you do, damned if you don't element that Raducanu finds herself in.
That's a very good point. As one insightful commentator noted, if she had complained about fatigue, she would have been instantly criticized for whining while sitting on immense endorsement earnings. She really has no easy position on this issue.
But the debate quickly moves beyond personal feelings and into the actual mechanics of the schedule, which highlights a deeper structural problem.
Yes. The system functionally forces players to play tournaments to maintain their ranking points, suggesting that the fatigue is not purely a voluntary choice.
This is a critical distinction. It shifts the blame from the player to the institution. It's not just about choice. It's about point retention and sanctions. Players are penalized heavily for missing mandatory events, regardless of fatigue or minor injury.
And the source material provided a very specific and impactful example involving Iga Swiatek, which illustrates just how brutal these rules can be.
Remind us of that one.
The source detailed that when Swiatek, who had played a significant number of matches, hadn't met the required number of events in October, the WTA retroactively annihilated her points from other major events.
Annihilated, that's a strong word.
It is. Specifically, 508 points she earned at Stuttgart and the WTA finals. Gone.
That is a staggering penalty. To put that into context for you, the listener, 508 points is nearly equivalent to winning a WTA 500 event. It's a reward that's taken away for not playing enough mandatory events.
So if you transpose that rule across the tour, it forces a player's hand. They have to enter events, often when they're not 100% physically or mentally rested, purely to prevent the retroactive destruction of points they've already earned.
It's a mechanism that ensures calendar compliance, but at the same time guarantees burnout for those consistently making deep runs.
It's institutionalized fatigue. You play mandatory events to keep your points, but playing those mandatory events increases the probability of injury and fatigue.
It's a vicious cycle.
It is. However, we must impartially note that counter-criticism aimed back at the top players who complain.
Right.
Fans often point out that these top players, despite complaining about the tour calendar, often pad their schedules with extra, highly lucrative exhibitions.
Events like the Laver Cups, the various Middle Eastern invitationals, all those off-season matches that bring in massive appearance fees.
They're financially smart decisions, of course, but they undoubtedly add to the accumulated fatigue that the players later attribute solely to the official tour schedule.
It creates a situation where the player is simultaneously demanding more rest from the tour and adding extra work for their own personal financial gain.
Which summarizes the complexity perfectly. The calendar issue isn't simply about being tired. It is a structural conflict where the needs of the top 1% rest, longevity, managing external demands clash violently with the needs of the vast majority.
Who need the money, the opportunity, and the points offered by the current packed schedule just to survive.
Exactly.
Raducanu's view is certainly shaped by her immense financial privilege, but the structural argument for the lower-ranked player needing the system to remain competitive is equally valid and far more widespread. It's a messy structural conflict with no easy answer, perfectly encapsulated by her one comment.
And her specific career trajectory, winning a major so early, securing those vast endorsements, it means she occupies this uniquely uncomfortable territory where her words are amplified and scrutinized far more than a player fighting for a spot in the top 100.
Her identity is sort of caught between the global brand and the struggling athlete.
I think that's a very good way to put it.
So, after this comprehensive analysis of her personal reset, her strategic overhaul, and the political landscape she is navigating, what is the ultimate takeaway for the listener heading into 2026?
Where do we land on all this?
If we recap the major insights from this deep dive, we've established that her off-season was defined not by rest, but by a crucial return to emotional safety and normality in Bromley.
Absolutely necessary for overcoming that harrowing stalking ordeal and reclaiming her personal confidence in public.
We've also observed a massive strategic shift in her approach to tennis. The mandate from Roig is to fundamentally transform her on-court identity.
She's aiming to move from being a high-effort, crafty tactician who relies on opponent weaknesses
To a player who possesses a consistent, better base level, capable of dictating points.
and which in turn reduces her overall physical burden and increases her durability.
And finally, we have the financial and structural context that frames her controversial view on the schedule. She sees the money and status provided by the sport as sufficient reason not to complain.
A stance that drew fierce criticism from those who feel her privilege blinds her to the physical and economic realities of her less sponsored peers who rely on every single tournament.
So what's the most important takeaway for someone listening to this?
I think the most important takeaway is that Raducanu is investing heavily in a fundamental technical and physical change for 2026. This is not just a cosmetic coaching change.
No.
It's an attempt to transition from a player with a huge ceiling but arguably no floor into a high-efficiency match dictator.
And the success of this new Team Roig, providing the technical blueprint and Stewart fortifying the physical base, that will determine whether her sponsorship-heavy income stream can finally be justified by consistent, sustainable on-court performance.
That's it in a nutshell.
It all hangs on that new philosophy. If Roig's mandate focused on improving technique, timing, and movement succeeds, allowing her to dictate more and, crucially, run less and finish points quicker, will this structural change be the long-sought key to overcoming the injuries and inconsistencies that plagued her 2025 season?
Well, here's the thought I'd leave you with. If she manages to become efficient enough to play fewer matches but go deeper in them, and if she reduces her injury rate by becoming a physical outlier, her personal performance might finally transcend the calendar debate entirely.
She could rest, play less, and still succeed.
Exactly. But the structural issue for the rest of the tour, for the vast majority struggling just to pay their way, that will remain. And that messy economic conflict will continue to define the sport for years to come.